Thank you for coming to our panel. Looking forward to an exciting conversation today on countering adversarial artificial intelligence. As we know, we'll just jump right into it. As we know, AI is revolutionizing many aspects of our lives, and AI is a very powerful tool. And as with any powerful tool, it can be used for good and for ill. Our geopolitical competitors, China, Russia, are using AI to bolster their cyber operations, their disinformation campaigns. Just last week on the Hill, actually, senior IC officials were testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee and called cyber operations or the cyber activities that the PRC and Russia were doing as their top priority, as the top threat posed to U.S. national security. And in particular, the PRC and Russian cyber actors were pre-positioning malware and cyber tools and U.S. infrastructure potentially to enable them during an event of a conflict. And so that was a pressing threat that they called out on the Hill. Going into the future, you can only imagine how AI tools will bolster these capabilities and enable our adversaries to do things like poison our data sets, manipulate algorithms without us knowing about it, and bring on a whole slew of potential threats, which brings us new challenges and opportunities. So today, our esteemed panelists will talk about the current threat landscape posed by our adversaries wielding these new tools, discuss strategies and opportunities for staying ahead of our competitors, and explore potential future scenarios, both in competition and in conflict. So let's dive right into it. I wanted to kind of structure our discussion today around three central themes. One, just setting the landscape. Two, talking about potential opportunities and challenges. And then three, kind of future casting, 5-10 years down the road, what can we picture this start to look like going forward? So to start us off, our geopolitical competitors, China, Russia, even non-state actors, are taking advantage of new AI-enabled tools to bolster their cyber disinformation campaigns. So, Jaap, I'll turn to you for the first question. Can you describe to us what China is doing in the space? What are their capabilities, intentions, plans going forward?
Great question, David. Do you have a minute? Because it's
26 minutes.
26 minutes. No, that will be unfair. No, it's a short question, but a very lengthy answer. In terms of AI, adversarial AI, China is basically all over the space. They're a massive country with a huge investment in science and technology, and China is, well, I think their goal to be the science technology leadership of the world is, I think, the geopolitical change of the era that we're going to experience. And I think that together with AI, also a pivotal change in what is possible. These two things combined requires all our combined efforts. We see China investing in AI for military purposes when it comes to UAV, unmanned kind of stuff. We can talk about that later. There's a lot of AI investments when it comes to planning military campaigns. But we also see that really people often talk about what goes on in monitoring people using AI. China's also doing it to their own police force and also their own military to really monitor what's going on there. And the same tool that they're developing there are also being used to monitor all kind of conversations that are going on inside China, outside of China. So really tracking geopolitical conversations. To what end, to what purpose? That is, I think, up for the analysts to discuss. Something key that we recently found out was the Chinese investing a lot in, and already since 2018, kind of like the Chinese version of Datena, or the Chinese version of SCSP. So what they're developing is really how can we track the scientific and technological progress of our counterparts using OSINT and use that to our benefit. A lot of investments in multi-language translation, a lot of investments in really understanding what the political decisions are, why they're being made, what kind of policy settings are being made for technology. So they're really trying to better understand what direction we are going in. So while we're having this discussion here, for sure, they're having the same discussion now over there. But yeah, I think that as a kickoff, So really military, UAV, information collection, both from inside and outside of China. And specifically on the campaigns. There's a bunch of companies actually out there also tracking that. Like, what kind of information campaigns can we start? Maybe that is a kickoff.
Yeah, no, that's great. Schuyler, maybe turning to you, Jaap was just talking about a lot of the domestic capabilities that China is building up on the AI side. Coming from U.S. Central Command, what is China, Russia, some of our competitors doing in the tech space, in addition to perhaps cyber operations, that kind of thing, but also making investments in your region? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think it's important to remember at all times that when we talk about global competition, when we talk about folks like China who are global competitors, that really does mean global. It is not restricted to the geographic area of the Indo-Pacific. And so what we feel in our theater is that we see China and Russia and Iran all very active, both in the military, economic, and technical space. We have the dubious honor of being the combatant command that has 3 of the 4 core peer or near peer competitors functioning in our area. We don't have North Korea. Indo-PACOM can keep them. That's perfectly fine. But for China, what we really look at is the technical investment and the implications specifically for network infrastructure. Because to us, AI and talking about AI investment is just the gateway to all of these other implications that we have to consider for national security reasons. So if you see a Chinese company making investments in an AI company in the Middle East, that suddenly opens the door to potential investments in Chinese-built network infrastructure, in opening their networks in order to have models be deployed or have models be coded and adjusted on them. There are cybersecurity implications of that have massive ripple effects. As soon as you have Chinese infrastructure or you have Chinese access, that means that network is potentially compromised, that the cybersecurity is not appropriate. And in addition, that means that our ability to work with that network and our ability to partner directly with that nation is negatively impacted. So this is a huge, huge concern for us. We see China making a lot of effort to integrate themselves, to push themselves technically in our theater in particular. The other piece that's worth noting that maybe not as tangible is the fact that we are working in a gray space of norms, where right now, every single day that any of us interact with AI tools, we are setting norms for the way that any of us interact with and use AI in the future. So for the US, we have been very careful in pushing ourselves to lay out very clear principles for ethical and responsible use of AI. China has not done the same. And the reality is that the first mover is inherently going to set norms that others cater themselves towards. So it is critically important to us to not only watch the technical side of this and the risks in network infrastructure, but also watch the norms that may be set that don't necessarily reflect a world in which we would collectively like to operate in, national security or otherwise.
Mikel, the engineer among us, from a technical perspective, what are some of the AI-enabled tool development things that you're seeing that are most concerning to you?
Yeah, first, let me say incredibly honored to be here at SCLP.
Is the mic on?
I think your mic.
Oh, I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but just flag it.
Speak up. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll just try to speak loud. Super honored to be here. Incredible event, and just honored to be part of this panel. Maybe I'll preface the answer to your question just really briefly. Just overall, I'm very optimistic for what technology could do for our country. We're already seeing amazing stuff, whether it be helping us tackle hard scientific challenges and like protein folding, helping us discover novel materials that are lighter and stronger. So overall, super optimistic. In terms of like the threats, I think it helps to maybe cluster them into two different food groups. One of them is, you don't really necessarily need AI to target our country and be up to shenanigans. There's a lot of things that can be done to accelerate current threats and risks. And then there's the other one having to do with what are the novel vulnerabilities and risks that are uniquely enabled by AI, right? So for the first one, it's a lot of things that some of my colleagues here have talked about. It's, whether it be AI-enabled information operations, we're concerned about that. There's also things having to do with the ability to uniquely identify and harvest data of individuals at larger scales, things like accelerated cyber attacks that are enabled by AI. So these are things that are happening already today, but that might change in nature and kind to some extent. And then there's the whole kind of other food group of things that might be uniquely enabled by AI-enabled systems that we need to look out for. And this is still we're still in the forefront of this phenomenon, but a lot of researchers and commercial firms are starting to see this on a day-to-day basis as we field AI systems. We're seeing unique vulnerabilities that we need to proactively address, and these are things like you've mentioned having to do with poisoning data that is going to be enabling AI systems, or uniquely deploying attacks that evade specific guardrails in AI systems. So these are new things that we now need to proactively address, and really, it's going to be kind of a whole of nation effort. It's not just for one company or an organization. It's something for government, industry, and society to think about how we kind of increase the resilience overall of the country.
And a perfect segue to our next chapter, so to speak, is the importance of public-private partnerships in combating this new emerging technology threat. Maybe, Schuyler, I'll start with you. You've talked about how it's important to, as we talk about the advancement of AI, to keep level expectations on how to build up our own capabilities in this arena. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that?
Sure. So I think it's important to understand what adversaries might be able to do, to also flip the coin and think about what we are capable of doing ourselves. It creates a degree of nuance and specificity that then allows us to actually take action for or against it. So when we have looked at AI from a combatant command perspective and through experimentation that we've run, our discovery has been a couple-fold. The first is that AI is not a light switch. This is not something where you flip it and all of a sudden everything that you're touching is automated and just passing from the start point all the way through to the end. AI is a gas and a brake pedal. You have the opportunity at all times to integrate somewhat more into your workflow, to throttle off of it and move more to a statistical regression type of analysis. There are ranges and degrees of gray space inside of AI that have to be acknowledged. If we just treat it as a light switch, our ability to effectively implement or counter it is just inherently going to be limited. And the other piece of what our experience has been is that AI is not necessarily going to be implied, or it's not going to yield you the value in the ways you might expect. We often talk about AI as being this sort of all or nothing. You ask it a question and it builds out this entire report of exactly what you want, or it executes this complex workflow. And what we have discovered is that AI really functions best in beast of burden functions, where it is sifting through massive amounts and giving you that first triage moment of, I think you should take a closer look at this. It is not popping out the final answer, but it's saying, I looked at 1,000 things and there are 50 that you really should take a closer look at. And then also as a sort of augmenting cog in the wheel of a manufacturing lab. It's not that it's creating the entire car, but there is a point where it injects with extreme efficiency a certain piece. You'll see folks who are working in coding do this really effectively when you're having coding segments being popped in. You'll see this really effectively when you ask questions to an LLM and you just ask for a very specific 1 to 2 sentence summary of something. It decreases the risk that the inconsistency and inaccuracy that sometimes can be associated with AI will completely derail you. So then if you think about it on the flip side, if you assume that consistency and accuracy is consistently a problem for AI, that means that you have to be mindful of the ways that that might influence you, if you're getting flooded space with inaccurate information or inconsistently accurate information. That influences the way that we have to function as the Department of Defense to sift through that. But you also have to think about whether it is even feasible for them, or whether you are building counter effects that realistically reflects what the adversary might even be building. And so for us, it's critically important to build out our own use cases and understand where AI can or cannot function particularly well, to even begin to understand how countering it would effectively work. Consistency and accuracy cannot be understated as for the importance of what our mission does. It is not tolerable in military operations to have arbitrary inconsistency and inaccuracy. And that means that we have to be really precise in the way that we use it. But conversely, it means our adversaries will have to do the same thing. It's not because we're simply willing to take on inaccuracy. Nobody wants inaccuracy and inconsistency. So when we think about countering it, we have to also view it through the lens of what is practically feasible for us or our adversaries to be using.
Now, one of the things that inspired you to create Datena was seeing some of these gaps in government capabilities. Can you talk about Datena, so far at least, is still serving exclusively government clients? Can you talk a little bit about how governments are talking to you about the gaps that they're experiencing, how Datena or through OSINT and through AI-enabled OSINT capability, you're trying to fill those gaps?
If people went to the demo yesterday, they know that I've been doing techno-economic intelligence on China now for 20 years. first 10 years for the Dutch government being posted there consecutively. So I experienced really firsthand that it was, it took a lot of time on a daily basis to really collect information that I needed to do my job, which is open source intelligence. And bringing that now together with using future AI tools that are actually with us today, like LLMs, that really creates like a new evolution in our system, and the accuracy part is key. So linking that where we can see what the LLM generated as a kind of like a junior analyst that can make mistakes, which components are directly out of our system. That is something that governments really like to see. They want to know, like, okay, this data, what's the data lineage? Can you figure out where the OSINT from China came from? If you can show us that, then we can work with the LLM. If there's no data lineage for them, we don't want to use AI. But that is clear. On the topic of the adversarial AI, and maybe a question to the entire audience. If you walk around here on this fair, every company that you see here, there's going to be a Chinese competitor or counterpart or similar version. Does that scare you? Do you want to know that company or companies? Are you ready for that kind of competition? Are you ready for having that kind of information, that your adversary has that kind of information? And what can you do against it? Because no, I don't have I'm not looking for a job. But if the Chinese government would ask me to build something for them, I could build it and really good for them. There's so much open information out there that we are spraying around all the time, which I think we should think twice about. How can we be slightly less open, but still having an open economy and a functioning democracy? So when you look around and you see really great US companies here and European companies here and companies from other NATO allies, think about the fact, like, there's AI companies in China doing the same or even better.
Now, maybe transitioning to what's lying on the road ahead, projecting out, future casting 5-10 years down the road, how do we see the nature of this threat evolving over time? Mikel, you've talked about how important it is, and you've talked about a little bit about this already, but how when we think about AI-enabled tools, it's obviously important to think about this beyond the context of things like ChatGPT, which is already, cyber actors could use those to help build their capabilities. But could you build off of that idea a little bit about going into the future, what other kinds of, as this threat evolves or as AI-enabled technologies evolve, what can we expect to see 5-10 years down into the future?
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think even for those of us who've been at this for like 20 years, it's really humbling to realize things are moving so fast that it's hard to predict. So I'll preface to the fact that I've been numerous times wrong, thinking that I really know what's coming next, and then only to be surprised. But maybe I'll just start with the current, and then we can look into the crystal ball. And I'll say, my first reaction when I started seeing kind of the rise of the current crop of kind of AI systems was like, really cool, but what's the big deal? These are just kind of chatbots, and it's kind of fun to play with, and oftentimes they're making up crazy things. But it's dawned on me after spending a lot of time on this, of kind of what we're actually building and where this is heading, that I think I was wrong in viewing these current crop as just chatbots. And I think a better analogy that has started to work for me to understand kind of where we're at and where this might be going is it's really kind of the beginnings of a bit of a kind of an emergent operating system, if you will, that's built for solving problems. And the way you could think about it is we have these very promising foundational models that now we're starting to view them with tools, right? So now they're not just interacting with people via chat, but they have access to, I guess, the whole suite of what we would call like software 1.0 tools, right? They could launch a browser or a terminal, have access to calendars, have access to calculators. So now you have these agents that are able to access these software 1.0 tools. They're also connected to the internet and have access to I/O, kind of being able to read and write. So really and even have the equivalent of what we used to have in old operating systems like RAM, right? This is the context window. So what we're seeing are, these more agentic systems that are able to decompose complex problems into subtasks, make long-term plans for solving these. So it's really exciting to see that trajectory and where that might head. Now, I'll just, maybe end by saying that, as we move from these being applied in kind of more limited contexts into more high stakes, mission critical environments, there's some really exciting developments that we're going to have to, tackle in terms of how do we increase the resilience against the fact that these systems are going to be targeted. And there's some really cool stuff happening in the space of where you essentially think about posing this almost as an adversarial game. You have, blue agents. These are the ones that we want to, solve some of the problems that we're needing to tackle. But you could also train a set of red adversarial agents that actually actively try to attack the blue agents, and you co-evolve them over time to increase the resilience. And that's a trick that is really simple, but also very powerful. And it's something that we have, used from simple things in the early days, from like solving, the game of Go or Atari games. But you could really bring that up to kind of higher stakes games, if you will.
So that's I guess private companies use those kinds of tools to bolster their own network defenses. Governments can also obviously adopt those tools and bolster their own network defenses. Schuyler, maybe turning it to you. Technology, like Mikel was saying, evolves at a lightning speed. Government is not necessarily always known to be a fast adopter of evolving technologies, but in this new age, how can governments, keep up?
I think it's perpetually difficult for all of the bureaucratic reasons that I'm sure anybody here who has ever interacted with government is aggressively familiar with. But at least the way that we as a combatant command look at it is that there are two main ways that you can at least try to keep pace in some meaningful way. And it's by focusing on users and deadlines. And what we mean by that is users should be obvious, that you should be asking at all times. Your ground truth of whether something is worth it or not should be based on whether you created value for your user. And for us as a combatant command, there are simple ways to ask that. Did we save you time? Are you better at your job? Are you safer? If the answer to one of those three questions is yes, we're in good shape. If I can see a pathway, if the answer is no, but there's a pathway to yes, we're in good shape. If the answer is no, and the practical feasibility to get the tool to a place to where the answer would be yes is really, really high, maybe we're barking up the wrong tree. But users will be the ultimate ground truth. You cannot lie about whether or not users are having a positive experience, particularly in a context like ours. But additionally, users introduce an element of realism that we think is so critically important to not wasting a ton of time chasing down technological route holes that are not worth anything. I mean, to his point, there are workflows that AI falls into. It is not that AI does your tooth to tail job. It's that you are going to have 100 steps, and maybe steps 11 through 13 are going to have AI embedded. And if you haven't thought about the rest of the workflow, then there is a high risk that you will build a tool that is not practical for deployment, either because it uses too much compute, so we can't run it in the location we need, because it doesn't have access to the data that you need, because you don't return a result on a timeline that reflects the speed at which the workflow runs. But only a user will be able to tell you the practical reality. Users are your tether to reality. And so what we ask industry, government partners, everyone, is that at all times, keep the user in the loop, because that is your best way of saving time. Might hurt your feelings earlier. You might find out early that your tool doesn't quite meet the need. But what we pledge to do is give you constructive feedback. We will not say we're throwing your tool away. We didn't like it the first time. What we pledge is that every time we will say, if you fix these three things, come back to us and we'll see what happens the next time. And then the second piece to us is moving forward at speed is deadlines. And what we mean is repeated deadlines, of setting deadlines for ourselves that we're going to run experimentation. And what we do at CENTCOM is run experimentation every 90 days. It is, again, hard to avoid the cold, hard truth of whether tools are working if every 90 days you have to flip your cards and say, users, how did this work for you? Did it work well? Did it not? Did it help you execute your job? And it gives you a chance then to say 90 days out, we'll see you again, and we'll give you another data point as to whether you are improving over time. If you are staying flat, that may be a problem. If you're declining, even worse. But for the speed that technology is moving at, and for the speed that we as an operational community load, having that combination of aggressive embedment with users and deadlines to force yourself to just drag yourselves forward will mitigate the risk of just sort of thinking about technology conceptually without making any sort of meaningful operational impact over time.
I think that's a great point. You have to build, government can build the supply for its workforce, but you have to also keep up with the demand. Make sure the UI is user-friendly and check in with the users, like you're saying, to make sure that it's meeting their needs. The other important piece of this is also data. The AI is only as good as the data that it runs on. The algorithms is only as good as the data it runs on. From an OSINT perspective, OSINT is only as good as the data that it's built on. As we go, again, projecting forward 5-10 years, we're creating a lot of data, but in China's example, restricting a lot of data. How do you see this playing out in the next 5 to 10 years?
Let's start with the 10 years. I like the story of Alice in Wonderland, where she meets a cat, a Cheshire cat, and she asks the cat, which road should I take, left or right? The cat says, like, where do you want to go? I don't know. Then any road will take you there. So looking at really at 10 years ahead, and I'm the technological optimist here, we're going to see more parts of governments run by data. If we're honest, how much stuff do you still actually type in ChatGPT? Can you check this for me? Or can you write this piece for me? People are doing this more and more and more. Eventually, you can foresee that systems like this, we're tailoring to a lot of government agencies where they want to have answers on what China is doing. But this can be what China is doing in science technology, or how can we counteract that, or how can we build our new economic policies. So having governments in the future who build policy, build policy by AI. That is something that I see, but I also see people at a micro level having an AI agent in their phone or with them. Then this information becomes super important, because this information in the public domain will be that people make wrong decisions because they get lazy for making their own decisions and rely on their own personal agent. The agent says, you should buy this, you should think about this, you should read this news article. And so this information will become, I think, an accelerated problem if people start to rely on their own AI agent. And at the same time, for government, it's really key. Yes, and I'm an advocate for using OSINT. But indeed, ask for data lineage, because garbage in is still, even with the best AI, or even more, garbage out. Yeah.
You have 2 minutes left, so we'll do a lightning round. Maybe I'll start with Mikel and work our way down the line. What's the one takeaway that you want our audience members to leave with when it comes to countering adversarial AI?
So I think that the main takeaway of it is to try to hold two ideas in our head at once. One is to understand the incredible potential of this technology, but then also understand that in the stakes of like high stakes mission critical environments, we have unique challenges, and it's going to be really kind of this kind of whole society approach that involves industry, government, academia working together to uniquely solve those specific challenges. And I think we're just in the beginning of that. So kind of call to action for everyone to be involved.
That's great.
My recommendation would, of course, integrate the users as much as possible for the purpose of reevaluating your perspective on AI internally and countering AI constantly. Like we are just at the beginning. This is still an extremely evolving space. Every time that you think you know the direction that AI is moving or the types of applications we might have, we're probably wrong. And so every 90 days, in my view, it's how I approach this, of every 90 days going out to users, going out to companies, understanding the way that the technology is starting to move, because the speed that it is moving at means that whatever opinion you hold right now may be out of date months from now. And so constantly holding yourself accountable to keep refreshing whether or not you have the latest and greatest information, or whether your opinions are based on the most update and relevant information, is going to be critically important to keep yourself on the right track.
And yeah, bring us home.
Yes, actually what Schuyler says, 100% agree with that. It is about know your adversary. If your adversary is China, know China. If it's China related to AI, know that adversary, know what they're doing in that space, and don't rely on information that is years old, or an expert that has been there, maybe like a few years old. Data freshness, data accuracy, demand that from your vendor when you make decisions. That's key.
It's a great note to end on. Please join me in thanking our panelists today, and thank you for coming.
Okay.